I'm not trying to tell God what to do. That was the thing I used to tell in the introductory workshops. I started centering prayer when I got tired of telling God what He needed to be doing. I am opening myself. I am saying, I'm here, and in your own silent language, change me, heal me, transform me, speak to me. I thought when I first went into centering prayer, what I wanted was I would get up out of my chair and I would be at perfect peace and everyone would love me because I would be such a wonderfully deep spiritual well of wisdom. That did not happen.
Hello and welcome to ChatCTK, a podcast exploring life and faith at Christ the King Catholic Church in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm your host, John Stotts, Director of Adult Faith Formation here at CTK. In this episode, I'm joined by longtime parishioner Carolyn Goddard, who for many years facilitated centering prayer and lectio divina groups here at Christ the King. We talk about the practice of centering prayer, how it fits in with other forms of prayer, and the importance of silence in the spiritual life. Carolyn, thanks so much for taking time to chat with us today about centering prayer and the contemplative life. To get started, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background. How have you been connected to Christ the King?
Well, I'm very happy to be here, John. Thank you for inviting me. I started coming to Christ the King in about 1982. My husband and I had been married. He was Methodist, I was Catholic, and we decided that we would go to the Episcopal Church together, which we did, but I missed Mass. I miss being connected to a Catholic community. So at that time, I started coming back to 4:30 Mass. And one day I was walking at Radnor Lake, another favorite pastime of mine, and ran into Father Jim Mallett, who was the pastor here at the time. And he invited me to become more involved. So I got involved with RCIA and eventually ended up serving on the staff here for about 12 years. So a deep connection with this parish and feels very much like home to me.
You were one of the first people I met here when I started coming here.
I didn't scare you away?
On the contrary, here I am, 12 years later myself, having been on staff. In the past several years, since I've known you, your name most often comes up around practices like centering prayer, contemplative living, ways of reading the scripture in a more meditative way, lectio divina. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were drawn into a more contemplative orientation towards prayer?
Sure. So I guess for me, it really started around 1984-ish. I read a book by Basil Pennington, which was renewing an ancient Christian prayer form, centering prayer. Basil Pennington, Thomas Keating, and William Menninger were three of the monks from St. Joseph's in Spencer, Massachusetts, who really developed the guidelines for centering prayer and were sort of the seed for the beginning of an organization called Contemplative Outreach. So I read that book and I started trying to practice this sitting quietly for 20 minutes and detaching from my thoughts. It was difficult. I had two very young children. I was teaching full time. And I found I could not do it on a regular basis. I would say my real turning point in my particular story was in 2000, January of 2000. Thomas Keating came to Nashville and gave a series of talks. And after that, they prompted individuals to start support groups. So in January of 2000, we began a Friday morning at 8 o'clock centering prayer at Christ the King. And I love to tell the story of the very first one that met.
Please.
I had 25 people show up, and I was in what is now the nursery. At that time was called the community room. And we were all sitting, I had lit the little candle, and we were in a circle and ready to begin. And as soon as we went into the silence, apparently not all the work was done on the new Parish Life Center. And some roofers began to just bang away at the roof. So I didn't know what to do. We were already sitting in prayer. The next week, about 3 people came back. But the group grew again and became a regular fixture here at Christ the King until the pandemic when we went online. So it was really that book and then my connection with St. Mary's Swanee. I had a number of friends there, and they are a center for contemplative practices, and and then just being connected with contemplative outreach. It just grew and grew each year, and became a very important part of my prayer life.
it seems significant to me that a seed was planted in 1984, but didn't seem to sprout into the light of day,
right?
So to speak, until 20 years later. And it gives me a lot of hope that we can be planting these seeds and the time may not be right. Yes. Someone may be listening to this podcast and think that sounds really nice, but I have kids at home and I can't do it. But it sounds like God isn't going anywhere in these forms of prayer.
No, God's very patient.
So maybe tell us a little bit, if there are those listening who don't know anything about centering prayer, what is it? How do you do it? How is it different from maybe other kinds of prayers that we might be familiar with?
Sure. I always like to say centering prayer does not replace other forms of prayer. It's not a, I'm going to give up this and try this new prayer form. It is really sort of, I like to think of it as a baseline. The notion has been in Christianity from the beginning, this sense that we take time apart to be with God and to listen. It is most often associated with the monastic tradition within Catholicism. And I think to a certain extent, we kind of lost touch with that probably in the 15th, 16th century as we all became very interested in arguing with other Christians about which was the right way to do things and became much more heady. It has 4 simple guidelines, at least the form I practice, centering prayer. And I'll just read those for you.
Please.
That's just, so first, you choose a sacred word as a symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within. So this is just a simple word, 1 or 2 sentences. And the idea is it doesn't have to be, in fact, it shouldn't be anything that has a lot of meaning for you. My husband's name is Drew. I would never use Drew as my centering, my sacred word, because it has too much impact. So, it can be something religious if you like, Jesu, God, peace, love, or, wind, just a simple word that marks your intention. And as Thomas Keating would say, centering prayer is much more about intention than attention. So you have this word, and the idea is I'm consenting to you, God. I'm open, I'm receptive, I'm here. The second guideline is sitting comfortably and with eyes closed, settle briefly, and silently introduce that sacred word. So you just get yourself into a quiet spot, get comfortable, usually 2 feet on the floor. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to close your eyes. You can avert your gaze, but just where you're not going to be distracted easily. And you just say the sacred word is a way of establishing your intention. Number 3, when engaged with thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. Thoughts are inevitable. In fact, they're integral. They're going to enter your mind. Excuse me. The idea is that we're trying to detach to a certain extent. Detach, yes. Not suppress or, bat them out of your head, but create a little distance. Just step back by repeating that sacred word so that the thoughts are still going on. We don't have control over that, but you're reestablishing your intention. I'm thinking, I didn't pick that up for dinner, or what about this, or what about that? But also a part of me, a deeper part of me is saying my sacred word, which is resting for me. Just resting, so that while my brain is doing what my brain will do, I'm also saying to God, I'm still here. There's a distraction, there's a little noise, but I'm still here. Number 4, at the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. Just maintain that. Don't jump out of the chair, which I often have done. But the idea is we want to try to carry this sense of being restful, at peace, aware of God as we step out of the chair and go into our everyday actions. So 4 very simple guidelines. I think the idea is to try to find a quiet place, a quiet time, and to set a timer is what I usually do. I do think it's reasonable to have the timer come out with a nice noise, not an alarm clock. You want to, again, maintain this. There's a physiological aspect to this. Your body settles. The recommendation from Contemplative Outreach is to try to do this twice a day for 20 minutes. It takes 20 minutes for us to settle in, pretty much. And the twice a day gives you perhaps a morning and a mid-afternoon sort of, recharge. When I would give the introductory workshop to this prayer form, I would tell people, pray as you can, as you can't. If you don't have 20 minutes, Try it for 5.
Mm.
I think most people will find they will want to add some time. They will find that this is something that, while not always a huge spiritual experience, is something that is grounding, is centering. So there's an attraction to it.
Let's see if I can remember the 4 steps.
Okay.
And see if any questions come up. So first step is to choose a word.
Right.
And you said not to make it an important word.
Right.
But you also said I could pick Jesus.
You can, if
Okay.
you want.
Okay. But it could also be something like spoon.
Yeah.
But yours is resting. So
Right.
I'm hearing maybe something that, because you said the sacred word somehow expresses it's a symbol of my intent.
Yes.
So maybe spoon is not the best symbol.
Well, you know,
But
I'm not going to tell you not to choose spoon,
Okay.
but the idea is it carries your intention. Yeah.
Okay.
And is simple.
Okay. Simple, carries my intention. And then eyes closed, feet on the floor. I introduce the sacred word.
Mm-hmm.
How often do I say it? Do I say it over and over?
Excellent question, John. Excellent. It's not a mantra.
Okay.
The notion is that when you are engaged with your thoughts, now thoughts is kind of like an umbrella word. It can mean, oh, my foot itches, or, there's just anything that comes into your consciousness.
Oh.
When you find you're engaged in it, it's just kind of passing through. Oh, yeah, my foot itches. No big deal. But if it's, oh, what am I going to have for lunch? Well, let's see. What's in the refrigerator? Oh, I should stop at Kroger and pick up. We're running out of man. If I'm beginning to get engaged
Yes.
with it, then I introduce this word. Keating gave the example of, if you're having a conversation, as we are now, and a fire truck goes past, it is natural for someone to glance over and notice the fire truck. But to turn back to the person that you're engaged in that conversation with, that's the intent of the sacred word is, yeah, there's this thought, there's these things going through my head, but I'm at one level of my being turning back towards God and saying, I'm here, I'm here, and we're here together.
Okay. So we've chosen the sacred word. We've quietly begun to introduce it. And then whenever our thoughts take us away,
Right.
and we realize that our thoughts have taken us away, then we use the sacred word to sort of reestablish ourselves back where we were a minute or 5 before.
Right.
And then when the timer goes off, take another breath and then go about your day.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
Well done.
Well, but what are you doing when you're not saying the word, and also when you're not distracted? Like, shouldn't you, if this is a prayer, shouldn't we be trying to talk to God, or like to try to have a sort of, like to think about a Bible story or something? It sounds like we're not doing anything.
Ooh, you've prompted lots of thoughts in my head.
Okay.
So one of them is Matthew 6:6, which is scripture reading when Jesus was asked, and teach us how to pray. He said, go into your room, close the door, and speak to your Father in silence. So the idea is, well, second thought you prompted. I think it was John of the Cross said that silence is God's first language. And Thomas Keating added, everything else is a bad translation. So we're listening, we're being receptive, we're being open. We're having, in some sense, I would want to say there is a conversation, but maybe more deeply there's a communion. God isn't, I'm not trying to tell God what to do. That was the thing I used to tell in the introductory workshops. I started centering prayer when I got tired of telling God what he needed to be doing. I am opening myself. I am saying, I'm here, and in your own silent language, change me, heal me, transform me, speak to me. I thought when I first went into centering prayer, what I wanted was I would get up out of my chair and I would be at perfect peace, and everyone would love me because I would be such a wonderfully deep spiritual well of wisdom. That did not happen. What happened was I began to understand that God had a little bit of sense of humor, that I would sometimes at the end of the prayer period think, you haven't called your sister in a month, and it'd be nice to check in with her. It was little things began to sort of come into my consciousness, and I called them promptings. They were very gentle, But the notion was that I was open to that. I was open to, instead of dictating to God or trying to fulfill expectations that had been put on me by some person or some institution, I was just saying, guide me. Here I am. I'm open. I'm ready. And I found that the changes were subtle, but good.
Subtle but good changes. Part of what you seem to be saying in this practice is that the sacred word brings you back to this intention to be with God. Mm-hmm. And that is not the same thing as thinking about God,
right?
As having ideas about God. So it seems to be pointing at some layer or level or aspect of ourselves that is not our current constant stream of thinking and feeling and wanting and needing, but something deeper than that. Is that fair?
Yeah. An image that I like is that our thoughts you can imagine them as boats, and they go down the stream of consciousness, and they're pretty consistently going down the stream of consciousness. A lot of times we're not even aware. They're just going on. But boats are on a body of water, and you are sinking down deeper into a different level of consciousness where words aren't the means of communication. You're sinking down below that level. Now, that level's still going on. There are going to be boats floating down your stream of consciousness while you center. Yeah. And that's fine. What centering prayer attempts to do is say, don't get on the boat and start steering it and checking what's in the hull and, rearranging the sails. Just let the boat go. So it's more about your intention, not what is going on in your head. And you set that intention. And then being able to step back a little bit, just that little space between your thoughts, and realizing there is another layer that is not, I am not my thoughts. There's another dimension here. And it is a dimension where I can be in communion with something that I can't explain, that is communicating with me in a way that I can't explain.
I'm associating to moments I've had, and I think we all have had, with good friends, with loved ones, where we're sort of caught in a moment of silence. Maybe we've been on a hike and we sort of crest a hill and there's a vista, and you pause and kind of look out, and to say something would kind of spoil the moment. You kind of look over at them and realize we're here together. Or at a romantic dinner, which I used to go out to. We manage from time to time.
Good.
Where the conversation kind of falls and you're maybe just holding hands and looking at each other, and words might spoil it. You're sharing in this sort of deeper. And then any word that follows that silence is really going to be pregnant with meaning. It's going to have followed. So you're talking about a form of prayer that mimics this kind of silent abiding or communion with God. Yes, very well put, John. What that brought to my mind was a friend whose father had died, and it was a very sad situation. And when I walked in to see her, there were no words, but to be present, to be there with her in that. This is about being open to presence and allowing that. And there's no need for words in some of these, in moments like that. There's no need for words. There is communication going on. There's love and intimacy. In fact, I think Keating would say that there's levels of connection. We meet someone, and it's like, I know your name, and maybe I learn your kids' names in order. And then a friendship develops, and you see this person and you enjoy being with them and things. But there's also that level of intimacy where you can just be with each other silently, and something is being communicated and enjoyed without words. That sounds tremendously nice. What I'm worried about is if I sit down to practice this, my mind will generate thoughts nonstop for 20 minutes, and then the timer will go off, and I'll be irritated with myself for not having been able to sort of sit still or be quiet. Does that ever happen?
Oh, never. It's never happened to me. No. Of course, it happens a lot. And the only part I'd say that is a problem there is you're being irritated with yourself. It is no problem if the thoughts, using that boat imagery, Keating would say sometimes, the whole flotilla of some nation's navy can come through your head on some days. That is not, you still have set your intention. What happens in your head is none of your business, really.
What happens in my head it's just, is none of my business.
It's none of your business. That's during this 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You're just letting it go. And sometimes this practice can be refreshing and renewing. Sometimes you get up and it's just like, oh my, I couldn't wait for that timer to go off. I don't feel good about this. But it doesn't make any difference. No matter how the sit goes for you, you have opened a part of yourself to the divine presence and been there. The only thing I think you can do wrong is purposely try to think during that 20-minute period. If it happens, it happens. If you didn't force it to happen, then you have set your intention, and whatever's going on in your head, maybe there's a lot going on in your life right now, and those thoughts just are having their way in your head, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Just try not to be irritated with yourself. Just say, I did my part. And it is something that, it is a discipline. It is recommended to do it regularly. And sometimes you will be happy that you had that 20 minutes and sit a little vacation from other things in your life. Other times it will mimic the noise and confusion that is part of our everyday lives. And that, either way, it's okay. It is okay.
How you began by suggesting that this is compatible, doesn't replace other forms of prayer. Can you say a little bit more about that, about how this might complement? Does it even enhance some forms of prayer? I mean, how does it fit in with the rest of Christian or Catholic life?
Oh, yeah. I don't think it takes away. If anything, it adds a dimension. I'll just do it with the liturgy, with coming to Mass. So let's think about this in terms of a relationship. So I have done my sits regularly, and this sense of God's presence in my life is more pervasive. When I come to Mass, which is where it was pervasive to begin with, it's even deeper. It's even deeper. And when I leave Mass, I know I am carrying it with me in a way that perhaps I wasn't as conscious of before. So it's just, if we think of prayer as the way in which we have a relationship with God, liturgy is one way. But just being quiet or taking a walk with a friend is also another way of deepening relationships. So, and the deeper the relationship becomes, each encounter with that person, with that being, with that mystery, has a more and more layers to it. So it adds a layer, I guess I would say, a layer of intimacy. Yeah.
Do you think this is a prayer for everyone, or a practice for everyone? Is there anyone who shouldn't practice this?
I think it's more appealing to us as we get a little older. I certainly think, even with children, taking a little time in silence, particularly in times of transition, saying, we're just going to be quiet here for a minute, please. Please, God, you're going to be quiet for a few minutes. Is a good habit to develop. But I think this is a prayer that, at least for me, I've seen appeals to people maybe in their 30s or a little bit later. And I'm not trying to, I'd be delighted to have a 10-year-old come sit with us.
Sure.
But I think there's a certain maturity of just having the patience maybe and being willing to say, I will commit to this on a regular basis. That appeals a little bit later in life than it does to a teenager, most American teenagers anyway.
Sure. Is this something you've described leading retreats around this, leading workshops? You've also described doing this as a daily practice. Is there a difference between practicing centering prayer with a group and practicing it by yourself? I
think so. And I think both are necessary. Yeah. I start most every morning with a sit for myself. But I find in a group, there is a different energy. And just for me personally, I don't know if this would be true for everyone, I find it's easier for me to quiet myself in a group. There's just something about the presence of others doing the practice with you that seems to be more settling. At home, I'm in my own home and I can hear things in the background and they can draw me away. But that's why I do it first thing in the morning, because I'm the first one up in my family.
Yes.
But no, I think both are important. And I just added that I also do this online. And I was very surprised when we went into the changing a lot of groups, centering prayer support groups that would meet weekly. And then with the pandemic, they went online. I thought, well, I don't know how this is going to work. But that same sense of being connected to these people, it works. Oh. And many of the groups that I used or was a part of became international. And that was thrilling to me. I have actually made friends in South Africa and Ireland through these groups where I will probably never see these people in person in my life. Wow. But I feel very connected. And some of them we've developed, ways of communicating outside of centering prayer. So, but the connection can still be there even in online support groups.
Yes. Yeah. If someone's listening and wants to get started right away, we got the 4 steps. Are there any other pieces of advice that you would give to someone who is interested in this and wants to sort of take first steps in developing the practice?
Yeah. A lot of times people think of contemplative stuff and monastic stuff as very individualistic, but really, I believe it is meant for community. I believe some of the disciplines, such as centering prayer or lectio divina, when practiced individually, give us characteristics to help us in community in some way. So while practicing alone is good, I do think support is really helpful. So yeah, I would say first and foremost, I'd offer myself as someone just wants to talk about it. And I've done this quite often, just had coffee and answered questions and talked about it. So I can be reached at Carolyn D, as in Daisy, that's my middle initial, Carolyn D. Goddard at gmail.com. And I'm happy to do that. The book that we recommend often through Contemplative Outreach is written by Thomas Keating, and it's called Open Mind, Open Heart. And it's kind of a primer for someone who wants to start doing centering prayer. The other thing would be to join a group. There are a number of groups in the Nashville area. They meet once a week. There are 3 possibilities on Friday morning, this morning. And just having that support of someone else that you're doing it with, and, you can say, I noticed this, what do you think? It's just someone to talk to, because I don't think our culture is very, it doesn't prepare us well for being quiet, for sitting still, for what feels like doing nothing. That, for Americans, I think at first can be very difficult. I remember I did an introductory workshop at a church, and this wonderful man who did all the setting up and stuff, and he'd invited me to come. And as he was walking to my car after the presentation, he goes, "Carolyn, that was really interesting. Really cool. Thank you. It's not prayer." So he was like, prayer is when you talk. Prayer is when you say things. And, he just was. So I think to kind of go beyond that, a little support from other people is helpful. So yeah, the book, call me. There are retreats. St. Mary Swanee is one that is close by, just an hour and a half from here, and they have a number of these retreats every year, introductory workshops or something that is around centering prayer. Almost any Catholic retreat center that people are familiar with would probably offer this too, just at some point. So, yeah, that retreat of getting away for a little bit and allowing yourself the time to sink into it and practice in a group, I think would be very helpful.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd want to share before we close today?
I'm going to put in a plug for Meditation Chapel.
Okay. So
Meditation Chapel is a website. I don't always get my technology words right, but I think it's a website. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. And inside that website, there are 8 chapels. And these chapels offer different types of meditation. One of the chapels is called the Thomas Keating Chapel, and that is the one in which most people do centering prayer. So if you were to just give your name and email address at the registration form in Meditation Chapel, you would then have access to these in online groups.
Okay.
So that would be something. I have found I really enjoy the freedom of being able to be at home and quickly, find a group if I'd like to pray.
Yes.
And then I'd like to highlight my notion that one thing in my life that centering prayer brought me was the sense that God has a sense of humor. Because when I get up in the morning, there are 2 readers that I usually do. One is for Al-Anon. It's called Courage to Change. And the other is usually a poetry. And right now I'm reading Mary Oliver's book called Devotions. So this morning as I did these readings, both of them were on meditation. And I just started laughing. And I said, God, apparently you thought I needed a little extra help. And the answer I got was, yeah, I didn't think it would hurt.
Yes.
So I'd just like to read this morning's Mary Oliver poem, if that's okay.
That sounds wonderful. Before we close with that, let me put in one plug for the Friday morning Christ the King Centering Prayer Group. This group meets at 8 a.m. in the Villa, which is a house owned by the parish across the street from the school. Every Friday for about 30 minutes, you can come and sit. It's led by Richard Rogers, who I most recently interviewed around his dream work, but he also leads the Centering Prayer group. And Carolyn, you're a regular participant as well. So that is available to anyone as well who wants to get started. Please share the poem.
Yeah. Well, I just want to highlight that invitation. Yeah, please do come join us. That'd be great. So this is Mary Oliver's poem called I Happen to Be Standing. I don't know where prayers go or what they do. Do cats pray while they sleep half asleep in the sun? Does the possum pray as it crosses the street? The sunflowers? The old black oak growing older every year? I know I can walk through the world, along the shore or under the trees, with my mind filled with things of little importance, a condition I can't really call being alive. Is prayer a gift or a petition, or does it matter? The sunflowers blaze, maybe that's their way. Maybe the cats are sound asleep, maybe not. While I was thinking this, I happened to be standing just outside my door with my notepad open, which is the way I begin every morning, when a wren began to sing. He was positively drenched with enthusiasm. I don't know why, and yet, why not? I wouldn't persuade you from whatever you believe or what you don't. That's your business. But I thought of the wren singing, what could this be if it isn't a prayer? So I just listened. Amen.
Amen. Carolyn, thanks so much for sharing today.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to ChatCTK, a podcast exploring life and faith at Christ the King Catholic Church. This podcast is written, directed, and recorded by John Stotts. CTK parishioner Brian Steinberg graciously donates his time to edit and produce the podcast. You can find new episodes at ctk.org/chatctk, or you can subscribe to it using Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app.